Chag Sameach, good morning. We're continuing with the laws of Sefirah, of counting the Omer. If you have a Mishnah Berurah and you want to follow along, we're on Taf Pei Tes Aleph, which is 489-1. And yesterday we looked in the Torah to see the Torah commandment of counting Sefirah, and we mentioned there are a couple of opinions about Sefirah nowadays when we don't have a temple, when we are in exile. Is it a rabbinic mitzvah or a Torah mitzvah? And that's going to have some practical ramifications that we'll get to. But today we're going to continue, and we're going to talk about the mitzvah of counting, and specifically when does one count, and some more details about that. Okay, so let's start with the Mishnah Berurah, actually, Sif Kat and Beis. So we count Sefirah after Mariv, Acher Tfilos Arvis, after the evening service, V'kodem Aleinu, before Aleinu. So what's the reason? Usually every service ends with Aleinu, but we say Sefirah before Aleinu. What's the reason for that? The kol mata efshar la'hagdume makdiminon, kadesh yiskayim yoser mashakasav tmimos tiyena. Because we want to count Sefirah the earliest possible time in the evening, so we have what's called Tmimos. Tmimos means it says you should count, the counting should be complete. So in order that we count a day completely, we want to count at the earliest possible time in the day. So obviously the Jewish day starts at night, so we want to count at the earliest possible time when it's nightfall. Now that doesn't mean that we count too early, before that it's for sure nightfall, but we want to make the counting as early as possible in the Jewish day. Now, when is the earliest time possible? So we're going to learn later on that is Tzeisok HaChavim. The proper time to count is Tzeisok HaChavim. That's when 3 stars come out, because we know there's something called Ben Hashmashos. When exactly the Jewish day starts is a topic of much halachic controversy. There are different times in the evening, when the evening begins. So we have something called sunset. That's when the sun goes below the horizon. And then there's a time which comes later, which is called Tzeisok HaChavim. That's when the stars come out. So when does the next day actually start? When does the Jewish day actually begin? So we are usually stringent both ways for most things. For example, on Shabbos we say starts at sunset, which is the earlier time, but we don't end until the 3 stars come out. So we're going with stringencies on both sides. So the proper time which we're going to learn to count Sefirah is Tzeisok HaChavim, is when the 3 stars come out. So that's about 42 minutes or 45 minutes after sunset. So in Manalapan, for example, tonight, that's around 8:03. So 8:03 would be the earliest time to count Sefirah, the proper time to count Sefirah, to count the Omer. Now we'll talk about what if you're in a minyan which davens earlier? What's the proper procedure to do? Let's say, because some minyanim, especially Manalapan, will daven around sunset, daven Mariv around sunset. So what do you do about counting Sefirah? So that's something we'll talk about in a later class. But the preferred time is Tzeisok HaChavim, when 3 stars come out, which is approximately 8:03 in Manalapan this evening. Now, if you did not, the reason that we're counting around Tzeisok HaChavim at the earlier time before Aleinu is because we want to count at the beginning of the day as much as possible, so we have what's called Tmimo, so the entire day is, so to say, included within that counting. Okay. Maschilin lispor v'nashim v'avadim, women and avadim p'turos memitzvazu. They are exempt from this mitzvah. The havi mitzvah seishes man grama, because it's a time-bound commandment. Something which we've mentioned many times is that women are exempt from time-bound commandments. So since Sefirah is a time-bound commandment, we count it once an evening for 49 days. So technically they are patur, they are exempt. However, because of Magen Avram, the Magen Avram writes, Miu kfar shavi alaya chayva. Women accepted upon themselves an obligation to count Sefirah. Jewish women are very holy, and many commandments which they are technically exempt from, they accepted upon themselves to do anyway. And very often when a group accepts upon themselves to do a mitzvah, it becomes a sort of a requirement. So perhaps that will apply here. But the Magen Avram says that women already took it upon himself to count Sefirah because they are very holy. I'm adding, however, the Mishnah Berurah says it seems that in our localities, women actually don't count. So it seems we have a dispute about this. Because of the Sefer Shulchan Shlema, the Alkapanim lo yivarchu, he says in the Sefer Shulchan Shlema they should not make a blessing. So most of the women back then, they didn't know what the words mean. To be honest, nowadays, many men also don't know what the words mean, the counting the Sefirah. We're going to learn that it's very important to know the words. Even if you're saying it in Hebrew, you have to know what the words mean. Right? If you say the words Hayom Shlosha Yamim Ba'omer and you don't know what that means, it doesn't really do much. So you have to say, if you should read it in English first to know that Hayom Shlosha Yamim Ba'omer means that today is 3 days of the Omer, and then you could read it in Hebrew. So he says that women should not make, if they're going to count, they should not make the blessing. We're going to learn one of the reasons for that seems to be that they're going to miss a night. He writes the women probably will miss a night, right? Men are required to go to evening services every night, so they're usually reminded with the congregation to count the Omer. But women who don't go to evening services, they will probably end up forgetting. So one should not make a blessing if one's not going to complete the mitzvah later on. So he says if women are going to count, they should do so without a blessing. But it's important also, this applies to men and women, to know what one is reading, to know the meaning of Sefirah, of the counting, before they read it. Okay, Holach B'Sofer. Now we said the optimal time to read Sefirah is at the beginning of the evening. Now what if someone doesn't do it at the beginning of the evening until 8:03? It says you could read Sefirah the whole night. It's still called Tamimos. If it's still the night time, it's still considered like you have a complete day when you are reading Sefirah. Now, the halacha is if it's still nighttime, you can still count Sefirah with the bracha. If it's the next day already, so since the Jewish day starts at night, the day after that night is still the same day, so then you could count without a bracha. We'll get to more details of those halachas later, but we'll stop here for today, and wishing everyone a continued very happy Pesach.